They don't need armies, they don't need tanks, and they certainly don't need to fire a single bullet to occupy your land. What they use, with surgical precision, is a balance sheet, a web of financial instruments disguised as rescue packages, development aid, or structural adjustments. This is the perfect formula for modern conquest. Lend, bind, seize. The global titans, the IMF, the World Bank, the WEF, these aren't just international organizations. They are the architects of a debt matrix designed to bring sovereign nations to their knees. In the halls of power, your vote means nothing. The real power lies in a credit rating, the curve of a government bond, or the cold, calculated gaze of a faceless investment fund. When money manipulates education and erodes the very idea of democracy, national autonomy becomes a technocratic illusion. Are we being ruled by a stateless empire, where a tiny elite dictates the rules while the masses obey like a cult?
Welcome to the invisible driver,
where there are truths that society doesn't want you to know. To understand how an entire nation can be brought to its knees without a single shot being fired, you first have to understand the weapon. And no, it's not a nuclear missile or a stealth bomber. It's that green piece of paper in your wallet. Most people think the US dollar is just currency. It's not. It is the operating system of the global matrix. Think about this. Why can the United States print trillions of dollars out of thin air while other nations face hyperinflation the moment they try the same? The answer isn't economic strength. The answer is a 1974 handshake in Riyadh that birthed the Petrodollar. Under this deal, the world's oil, the lifeblood of modern civilization, must be traded exclusively in US dollars. If you want to keep the lights on in Tokyo, Berlin, or Brasilia, you need dollars. This creates a permanent artificial demand for our currency, allowing the Federal Reserve to export our inflation to the rest of the world.
But here is the glitch in the matrix they don't want you to see.
The Federal Reserve is neither federal, nor does it have any reserves. It is a private banking cartel that lends money to the government at interest. Every time the Fed raises interest rates in a glass building in Washington, D.C., a shockwave ripples across the planet. Suddenly, a country like Argentina or Sri Lanka, which took out loans in dollars when rates were low, finds its debt has doubled overnight. They didn't change anything. They didn't work less. They were simply reprogrammed into bankruptcy by a spreadsheet half a world away. The lesson here is simple but terrifying. He who controls the currency controls the range of human possibility. When you own the engine of the empire, you don't need to invade a country to own it. You just need to make sure they can never pay you back in anything other than the paper you alone have the right to print.
But the system knows that eventually,
people realize they are being robbed. They realize the game is rigged. And when a nation starts to question the engine, the architects don't send the Marines first. No, they send a much more polite, much more dangerous kind of soldier. They send the men in the $1,000 suits, the professionals who specialize in making a takeover look like a helping hand.
Enter the economic hitman.
Decades ago, these men carried suitcases filled with cash or incentives. Today, they carry MacBooks and proprietary growth models. Their weapon of choice isn't a bribe, it's a forecast. To understand how this works, you have to realize that real-world power doesn't look like a movie. It looks like a PowerPoint presentation in a five-star hotel. These consultants are sent into a developing nation with one goal: to inflate the numbers. They show a leader a spreadsheet, a beautiful, glowing projection that says, if you borrow $10 billion to build this high-speed rail or this massive dam, your economy will grow by 15%. But the numbers are cooked. They are designed to be impossible to achieve. And here is the part that should make every American taxpayer's blood boil. That $10 billion never actually reaches the people of that country. It never even leaves the United States.
The money goes directly from a global bank to a massive Western engineering firm or a defense contractor. Our corporations get the cash. The foreign country gets the debt. It is a closed-loop system of crony capitalism where the global elite win twice and the sovereign nation loses its future. Look at the history of nations like Ecuador or Panama. Leaders who refused to play this game, leaders who wanted to actually protect their own people, frequently met with unfortunate accidents. But today, the system has evolved. They don't need the accidents anymore because the debt does the killing for them. The lesson is brutal. Debt is not a financial tool. It is a leash. If a global institution offers you a miracle funded by money you can't control, you aren't the customer. You are the collateral. But how do they make this leash look so attractive? How do they convince an entire government to walk into a trap with a smile on their face? It starts with the most dangerous phase of the entire operation. A phase so seductive, it's known in the inner circles as the honey trap. Imagine you're the leader of a struggling nation. Your people are hungry, your infrastructure is crumbling, and the world is watching. Then, like a miracle, they appear. The saviors from the global institutions. They don't come with demands, they come with gifts. This is the honey trap of development aid. On the surface, it looks like the deal of a lifetime. They offer you billions in loans with interest rates so low they're almost invisible. They give you a grace period, 10 years where you don't have to pay back a single cent. The international press hails you as a visionary, a leader who is finally modernizing his country. But here is the sting. In the fine print of those thousands of pages, there is a clause called tied aid. It means that while they give you the money, you aren't allowed to spend it how you want. You are forced to hire their contractors, buy their technology, and use their consultants. The money effectively does a U-turn. It leaves a bank in Washington or Brussels, does a lap around your capital city for a photo op, and lands right back into the accounts of Fortune 500 companies. For the American audience, think of it like those pre-approved credit cards you get in the mail. 0% interest for 12 months. It sounds like free money until the clock runs out, and suddenly the interest rate spikes to 29%, and you realize you've spent money you don't have on things you didn't need. Take a look at what happened in sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia. Massive aid packages were signed to build coal plants or highways. But the conditions required these countries to privatize their water, their electricity, and their health care. By the time the grace period ended, the country didn't own its own resources anymore. The lenders did. The lesson? In the world of global finance, if you aren't paying for the product, you are the product. Aid isn't about charity. It's about market entry. It's about softening the target before the real photon, the real takeover begins. But as dangerous as these international organizations are, they are just the public face of the operation. Behind the IMF and the World Bank lies a much deeper, much darker layer of the matrix.
A layer where the names aren't on government buildings, but on the deeds to almost everything you see. Who are the real puppet masters holding the strings of this global debt? It's time we talk about the titans who own the world while you're asleep.
If you think the IMF and the World Bank are the end of the line, you're only looking at the lobby. To see the penthouse of the global matrix, you have to look at two names that most people hear, but few truly understand: BlackRock and Vanguard. We are talking about a concentration of wealth that is historically unprecedented. Together, these two entities manage nearly $20 trillion in assets. To put that in perspective, that is more than the entire GDP of every nation on Earth, except for the United States and China. But they aren't just investment firms. They are the ultimate shareholders of the companies that own your life. They own the banks that lend the money to the nations. They own the defense contractors that build the weapons. And they own the media companies that tell you everything is fine. The most terrifying part isn't just the money, it's the intelligence. BlackRock operates a proprietary AI system called Aladdin. This isn't some chatbot. It is a high-frequency risk management machine that monitors and directs over $21 trillion in assets. It sees the collapses before they happen. It knows which country is about to buckle under its debt before the president of that country even gets the memo. For the American viewer, here are the stakes. BlackRock isn't just buying the debt of distant nations. They are the same entity buying up thousands of single-family homes in your neighborhood, driving prices up so high that the American dream is becoming a subscription service. They don't want you to own anything, not your house, and certainly not your country. Look at the reconstruction of war-torn or debt-stricken nations. Who is often the first at the table to manage the investment fund for rebuilding? BlackRock. They take the ruins of a sovereign state and turn them into a diversified portfolio for their elite clients. The lesson is chilling. When power is privatized, accountability vanishes. You can't vote out a CEO. You can't protest an algorithm. You can only watch as your national assets are converted into units on a digital ledger. But what happens when the honey trap ends and the debt finally comes due? That is when the suit and tie saviors disappear and the executioners arrive. It's time to look at the guillotine, the moment they stop being your partner and start being your master. The honeymoon is over. The miracle loans have turned into a nightmare, and now the bailiffs have arrived at the door of the nation. But they don't carry clipboards. They carry a document known as a structural adjustment program, the IMF's financial guillotine. When a country can no longer keep up with its debt payments, the saviors return. But this time, the smile is gone. They tell the government, "We will give you more money to stay afloat, but only if you perform surgery on your own people." This surgery is what they call austerity. In plain English, this means the government is forced to dismantle itself. They are told to slash the minimum wage, hike the price of electricity, and cut funding for hospitals and schools. Why? Because every dollar saved on a child's education or an elderly person's pension is another dollar that can be sent back to the international creditors. Look at what happened to Greece in 2010. The world was told that the €240 billion bailout saved the country. That is a lie. Over 90% of that money never even touched the Greek economy. It went straight back to German and French banks to pay off interest. Meanwhile, the Greek people faced a 40% cut to their pensions, a 35% spike in suicide rates, and a generation of young people who had to flee their own country just to find a job. For those of us in the States,
This sounds like a distant problem. But think about how our own cities are managed. When a city goes bankrupt, who gets paid first? The bondholders on Wall Street. Who gets their pensions cut? The police officers, the firefighters, and the teachers. It is the same playbook, just a different scale. The lesson here is vital. Austerity isn't a fix for debt. It is a transfer of wealth. It is the process of liquidating a nation's dignity to protect a bank's balance sheet.
But what if a country tries to fight back? What if a leader stands up and says, "Our people come before your interest rates"? That is when the matrix activates its most silent and deadly assassins. These aren't men with guns. They are the men who control the credit rating, the ones who can destroy a country's future with a single mouse click. Imagine you're a leader who wants to put your people first. You decide to spend a little less on debt interest and a little more on feeding your citizens. In that exact moment, thousands of miles away, in a high-rise in Manhattan, 3 private companies you didn't vote for, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch, decide your fate. With a single press of a button, they drop your credit rating from a stable A to a junk status. Suddenly, the interest rate on your national debt doesn't just go up, it explodes. Your currency collapses. Investors vanish overnight. You haven't been invaded, you haven't been sanctioned, and there is no war, yet your economy is in ruins. This is assassination by spreadsheet. These agencies are the gatekeepers of the global matrix. They claim to be objective, but let's look at the record. These are the same firms that gave AAA ratings to the toxic subprime mortgages that blew up our own economy in 2008. They were wrong then, and they were protected while millions of Americans lost their homes. Now, they use that same flawed power to discipline entire nations that dare to step out of line. But the real horror begins when the vulture funds move in. These are hedge funds that wait for a country to stumble. They buy up a nation's debt for pennies on the dollar and then sue for the full amount plus interest and penalties in a New York court. Look at the case of Argentina and billionaire Paul Singer. His fund bought Argentinian debt for peanuts and then spent years hunting the country down. He didn't just sue. He convinced a judge to authorize the seizure of an Argentinian naval training ship in a foreign port. A private billionaire held a sovereign nation's military vessel hostage over a financial gamble. The lesson is this: in the global financial system, sovereignty is an illusion if your reputation is owned by Wall Street. Credit ratings are not a measure of health. They are a measure of obedience. But as the world starts to catch on to this game, the architects are shifting the goalposts. They've realized that debt and interest aren't enough to keep everyone in line. They need a new moral framework, a way to judge a nation not just by its bank account, but by its soul. They call it progress. They call it sustainability. But for the nations of the world, it is simply the next evolution of the trap. They've found a new way to keep the world in a cage, and this time, it's wrapped in a green ribbon. It's called ESG, Environmental, Social, and Governance. On the surface, it sounds like a noble, almost holy mission to save the planet and promote equity. But in the reality of the matrix, ESG is the new green colonialism. Think about the sheer hypocrisy of the game. The West built its entire civilization, its wealth, and its massive infrastructure on the back of cheap, reliable energy: coal, oil, and gas. But now that the elite are at the top, they've pulled up the ladder. Through the ESG framework, they tell developing nations,
You aren't allowed to use those fuels to grow. You must jump straight to expensive, unreliable green energy. And here is the kicker. Who owns the patents, the lithium mines, and the corporations that sell that green technology? The very same Western titans who are lending the money to buy them. It is a forced market. They use the climate as a hostage to ensure that poor nations stay energy dependent and forever in debt to the green machine. Look at the tragedy of Sri Lanka in 2021. In a desperate bid to raise their ESG score and please international lenders, the government suddenly banned all chemical fertilizers. They wanted to be the world's first 100% organic nation. The result? Total agricultural collapse. Food production plummeted, famine set in, and the economy spiraled into a violent revolution. They traded their food security for a high score on a spreadsheet in Davos. For the American observer, this should look terrifyingly familiar. We see our own banks and investment firms using these same ESG scores to decide which American companies get loans and which are starved of capital. It's a social credit system for the economy, managed by people you never voted for. The lesson is this: when saving the world becomes a mandatory financial metric, it is no longer about the environment. It is about who has the power to grant you permission to exist. If they can control your energy and your food through moral mandates, they own your survival. But the matrix doesn't stop at your power plants or your farms. To truly own a nation for the long term, they have to own something much deeper. They have to ensure that the next generation doesn't even have the vocabulary to describe the cage they are living in. They have to go after the one thing we all hold sacred, the minds of our children. To truly own a nation for the long term, you don't just need to own its debt or its power plants. You have to own their future. And that means you have to go after the one thing we all hold sacred, the minds of our children. Welcome to the third and final act of the formula, the seizure of the soul. When global institutions like the World Bank or the WEF invest in education in developing nations, it isn't a gift of literacy. It is a factory reset of the national consciousness. They call it modernization or global citizenship education. But what it really means is the systematic removal of everything that makes a people strong, independent, and capable of rebellion. They push for curricula that de-emphasize national history, philosophy, and classical logic, the very tools used to question power. They replace them with soft skills, market alignment, and digital literacy. On the surface, it sounds practical, but the goal is to produce a workforce of perfectly programmed cogs. They want people who are smart enough to operate the software and fill out the tax forms, but too intellectually hollow to ask why their country is being sold off in the first place. For the American parent, this isn't some distant conspiracy. This is the common core of the global matrix. We see it in the explosion of student debt, which turns the quest for knowledge into a lifelong financial shackle. We see it in universities that have shifted from being marketplaces of ideas to being training centers for ideological conformity. If you can be conditioned to accept a narrative over your own eyes, you are much easier to govern through a spreadsheet. Look at the programs funded by global foundations in Africa and South America. They aren't teaching kids how to build their own sovereign industries. They are teaching them how to be ready for the global market, which is a polite way of saying ready to be cheap labor for a multinational corporation. The lesson is heartbreaking but vital. Education is either a tool for liberation or a tool for domesticity. If you do not teach your children who they are, where they came from, and how to think for themselves, the system will gladly teach them who it wants them to be. A people who forget their history are a people who won't even realize when they've lost their freedom. But what happens when the education system, the debt trap, and the green mandates all converge? We reach the end game. We reach the point where the politicians we vote for become nothing more than actors, and the real decisions are made by a group of people who were never on a ballot. We are entering the era of the Technocratic Coup, where your vote is the greatest illusion of all.
You felt it, haven't you? That nagging suspicion that no matter who you vote for, no matter which party takes the White House or Congress, the machine just keeps grinding forward. The wars don't stop. The spending doesn't slow down. Your cost of living keeps climbing. That's because we are no longer living in a traditional democracy. We are living through a technocratic coup d'etat. In the global matrix, the ballot box has been hollowed out. It's been replaced by technical experts, men and women who were never elected, who cannot be fired by the voters, and who make the decisions that actually shape your life. They sit in the Federal Reserve, the IMF, the WEF, and the administrative alphabet agencies. They don't use a military coup to take power. They use a crisis. Look at what happened in Europe during the debt crisis. When Italy and Greece couldn't pay their creditors, the global matrix didn't ask the people what to do. Instead, the democratically elected leaders were pushed aside and technocratic prime ministers, former central bankers, and EU bureaucrats were installed overnight to run the country. No one voted for them. They were appointed by the banks to ensure the banks got paid. In America, we see this in the uniparty and the administrative state. Major shifts in our society, from the push for digital IDs to the managed decline of our currency, aren't debated on the floor of the House. They are recommendations from global forums that are quietly adopted by unelected bureaucrats. The lesson is a hard pill to swallow. A ballot has no power if the budget is already owned by a creditor. When a nation is buried in debt, the politicians become nothing more than actors in a theater designed to keep the public distracted while the technocrats manage the liquidation of the country. We've been told that this is just how the world works, that the system is too big to change, and that your only choice is to obey or be crushed. They want you to believe that there is no way out of the matrix, but they're wrong. The architects of this system have one great fear, that you will stop playing their game. As the digital cage tightens, a back door is being built. There is a way to reclaim your sovereignty, to protect your family, and to exit the matrix before the door locks forever. The matrix depends on one thing to survive: your participation. It requires you to stay in debt, to keep using their currency, and to keep believing that their experts have your best interests at heart. But the moment you stop meeting them, the bars of the cage begin to vanish. This is the great escape. Sovereignty isn't something a government gives you. It is something you reclaim. And in the 21st century, that reclamation is happening through decentralization. The architects of the debt trap fear anything they cannot track, tax, or freeze. This is why they are terrified of sound money. Whether it's physical gold tucked away in a safe or Bitcoin held in a private wallet where you, and only you, hold the keys, you are essentially building an exit ramp from their engine of empire. When you move your wealth into assets that cannot be printed out of thin air by a central bank, you are no longer paying for their wars or their bailouts. But financial sovereignty is useless without mental sovereignty.
Look at the growing parallel economy right here in America. Families are pulling their children out of the indoctrination centers and homeschooling them. Neighbors are forming local trade networks, buying meat from local farmers instead of multinational conglomerates. People are switching to encrypted communication and decentralized media. They are unplugging from the grid, not just for survival, but for liberty. Take a lesson from history. Every empire eventually collapses under the weight of its own greed and complexity. The Roman Empire didn't end in a day. People simply stopped believing in the central authority and began building their own local systems. We are in that moment right now. The lesson is this: your chains are only as strong as your dependents. If you rely on the matrix for your food, your energy, your information, and your money, you are a subject. If you take responsibility for those things yourself, you are a sovereign individual. The transition won't be easy. The system will call you dangerous. They will call you fringe. They will try to shame you back into the herd. But remember, they only yell because they are losing their grip. You now have the map. You've seen the honey trap. You've met the Hitman, and you've looked into the eyes of the puppet masters. The question is no longer what is happening. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The cage is open. All you have to do is walk out. Welcome to the side of the truth. Welcome to the invisible driver, where there are truths that society doesn't want you to know.